everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today we will be continuing our how to build a Ford 5.3 liter 3-valve engine. Today's video is kind of a longer one and we are focusing on bottom end assembly and prepping for machine shop. I also go over exactly what to say and what to bring to the machine shop so you have as few as back and forth trips as possible. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and thank our amazing sponsor, Summit Racing. I've been using Summit Racing for decades at this point. They are my go-to for any kind of speed part, and they were kind enough to sponsor this whole series. This whole series would not be happening as quickly as it would without their awesome support, so make sure you get all of your speed parts from summitracing.com. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into it. Next thing we can do is remove our knock sensors, both of them with a 10mm socket. And since they are in the lifter valley, for lack of a better term, they're underneath the intake manifold, I would just go ahead and get new ones. They're not very expensive, and it'd be a real bummer if one of these went out after you've rebuilt your engine. Next thing we can do is remove our engine isolators, including this plate. We're just going to remove the plate. It's 3 13mm bolts. And while you have the engine out, I would just go ahead and replace these. These look okay, but it'd be, again, a real bummer if you were to rebuild this whole engine and then you put the stock isolator back in and then it breaks. And just do the same thing for the other side. So now we can remove our oil filter and the housing that also holds a coolant passage for the radiator hose and the reservoir. What we can do is take a big pair of channel locks and get that filter off there. It's really easy when it's not in the truck, right? Usually you just break them loose and then you'll be good to go. There should be a little bit of oil that leaks out though, so don't be surprised if it doesn't. Oh, looks like mine's bone dry. I'll take it. Cool. Then we can remove this junction block that contains the oil pressure sender and the coolant passageways and the mount for the oil filter. It is 4 10mm bolts. Ooh, scongy. Pretty long bolt. There we go. We can just remove this junction for the coolant and the oil. Everything looks pretty good. I might have this sent off to get hot tanked as well because it is spongy. That is all grease. That is not black paint, unfortunately. Then I'm also going to remove the gasket and throw that in the trash and get a brand new one. So now with a wide catch basin underneath, there's one thing left to do, and that's to take apart the bottom end. So I need to carefully rotate our engine over. Oop, see what I mean? Coolant might be pouring out of the passageways. That's completely normal to do that. And we're gonna flip this guy completely over on its head. And then once it is perfectly perpendicular with the ground, we can put our pin back into our stand so it doesn't flop on us unexpectedly. So now we can focus on taking our oil pan off. I'm actually going to save this oil pan. The only thing I'm probably going to end up replacing is over here on the oil level sender. When you're removing a pan like this, it's a good idea to go in a reverse spiral so you kind of work from the inside out, just to prevent as much deflection as possible. And these are a 13mm, and you can actually take the bolts completely out. And what I like to do is put them in a Ziploc baggie and write oil pan on it so I can't get lost during reassembly. You could just buy new bolts too, but these are reusable. So go ahead and put these in a baggie of some sort and write oil pan on it. So luckily my front cover has already been removed. If you haven't removed it at this point, you won't really have a place to gain some leverage, but it should come off fairly easily. If it doesn't, an implement of leverage might be your friend. And again, I'm going to most likely reuse this oil pan. There's nothing wrong with it, just a clean up and a fresh coat of paint, and I bet it will be awesome. We can just remove that and take that away and expose our rotating assembly. And what you want to do at this point is take this gasket off and throw it into the trash and spend the money and get a new one. See how this one's already ruined? Yeah, there's reason for that. So toss this guy, buy a new one. So now we get a good look at the inside of our rotating assembly, and this one looks like it is in pretty good shape. I think this assembly is going to be pretty straightforward and easy, but what we need to do now is remove our pickup and our oil pump there. So this bolt right here is 10 millimeter. Get that guy out of there. And then the two holding it to the pump are 8 millimeter. And hang on to these bolts, they are reusable. Might even be reusing the pickup unless my new one comes with a new one. I will be upgrading the oil pump though. I would not use this stock oil pump. I would totally get a new one. So it might come with the pickup, it might not. So hold on to the pickup at least. And with the pickup, just kind of pull it straight out like that and set it aside. Again, we might be reusing this. We would just need to replace the O-ring with a new one. Because inside the pickup, if there's any like metal chunks or debris, I would just go ahead and get a new pickup. This one looks okay though. The little webbing you see in there, those little shiny bits, that's just oil filmed across the top. But I'm looking inside of there and this pickup looks perfectly good. You could just clean it and reuse it. Be good. So the next thing we can do is remove this small bit of the timing set. Usually they just pull right off like this one does, but if it doesn't, there are jaw pullers that kind of do this and then have a bit on the middle that goes on the end of the crank snout, but this one's really easy, just pulls off. And I would get a new one of these. The teeth on these can go rounded, like these aren't as pointy as they should be. I would just go ahead and get a new one. They most likely come with a new timing set anyway. And then remove the 3 8mm bolts that hold the oil pump on. I'd hold on to the bolts, but I would get a new pump, especially because this one's known for not supplying adequate oil pressure to this engine in particular. It's a really well-known issue on this guy. So once you remove that, you can just go ahead and pull that straight towards you like this, and again, I would get a new unit. The next thing I'm going to do is replace the damper bolt that we removed earlier. And why would I do that? Well, it's going to give me a nice handle to rotate the engine over with. So just go ahead and grab your 18mm socket, and you can put it on the end of your ratchet, or you can just use a wrench, and then we can rotate the engine over, which we're going to need very shortly. And if your engine's like really stuck, you can put a long implement here and have a lot more torque, and it should turn over for you. So this is always handy to just kind of quickly rotate things over. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to rotate the engine over in such a way that 1 and 2 are at the tallest position, just like that. Basically, so number 1 is at the bottommost point, so we can see the bolts that are holding the connecting rod to the crankshaft. So this next bit is really important. What we want to do is take an 11mm socket on your ratchet, and we're going to break these loose, and they can be really tight, so prepare for that. And you only want to turn it just a little bit like that, and then go to the other one and try to replicate what you just did. So you want to do this as evenly as you possibly can. There we go. Usually you just need to break them loose, and then they will just rotate. But what we're going to do is we're going to take them about halfway out. And why would I do that? Well, I want to break the rod and the cap loose, and the way you do that is you take these about halfway out, and then you tap on the back of the piston, and it should break apart. Sometimes they're really loose though, and you can just kind of jiggle the cap off, but that's not usually how it goes. So what we can do next is grab a long implement and put it on the back of the piston, like that, and then we can just give it a couple of taps. You don't need the strength of Thor or something, just a couple light taps. I just have this really long extension. You could use a long screwdriver or something like that. And make sure it's on the back of the piston like mine is, not like on the skirt or something or on the bore. So just give it a little tap, and look at that. Our rod's separated from our rod end. Fantastic. And before I remove the cap, what I'm going to do is right here, I'm going to scratch a number 1 so I know that it came out of number 1, and an arrow so I know which way it goes back in. I know it's a little tough to see on camera, but essentially you want this to say number 1 and point that way. I reinforce that with my paint pen, 1, that way. So that way I know when I'm putting it back together to go that way, the paint pen is most likely going to come off in the hot tank, but I can probably ask the machine shop to designate that for me. So that way the cap and rod are in their right position, orientated the correct way. So make sure that you keep track of that, and you can't mix up rods and caps. Like, you can't put this cap on this rod. The rods and caps have to stay with wherever they came from. They're even numbered on the side very lightly. It's kind of hard to tell, but I noticed that it wasn't numbered or orientated with any kind of permanent designation. So you could probably punch in a 1 and an arrow if you wanted to. I might do that when it's off the engine. We'll just, we'll kind of see. We'll see what the machine shop says. They probably have a good way of delineating that. So now what we can do is remove this cap from our crankshaft by removing the bolts the rest of the way. You want to do this as evenly as you can, and then you can just kind of wiggle her off. And look, the cap's off, our bearing stayed behind. That's okay. So we can remove our bearing that's been left behind and take a look at it. Actually, it looks okay. I'm going to put new ones in, but this bearing looks fine. Not bad. This engine's in pretty good health. So next what I'm going to do is take this very long extension, put it on the back of the piston, not on the bore itself, and I'm just going to give it some light taps, and you're going to watch that piston come towards you. Now, it's really important not to hit the sidewall at all, because if you hit the sidewall and you gash it more than 30 thousandths of an inch or something, then you won't be able to machine at 30 thousandths. You're going to have to go bigger, and what happens if you did that over what this engine is really capable of taking machine shop-wise, so you just don't want to do that. So put a nice flat object, again you can use a long screwdriver, and then just give it some taps and support the connecting rod with your other hand the entire way out. Sometimes your implement might get stuck as the connecting rod rotates on the wrist pin. The bearing just fell out, that's fine. So make sure you're not getting this jammed on anything. Again, hold the connecting rod with your other hand. So I'm using my hammer to tap. There we go. A little bit of taps, and then reach through with your left hand, supporting the connecting rod, and then, see, I'm holding it with my pinky as I'm taking it out. So you just don't want the connecting rod to drag on that cylinder bore. And check it out. We have our first piston out. How cool is that? And then what I like to do is I have this nice caddy that has an F that I've written on there and pointed to the front. So this stands for the front of the engine. Notice how the engine's orientated. Number 1 is over there on the right. It's flipped over, just in case you're wondering why it's on the right. And what I did is I have the piston in the exact orientation that it came out of. So all I have to do when I replace them is to do this. See how I did that? Take it right out, put it right there, and then I take its cap that was facing the exact same way, and you can tell which way it goes on because the two locks right there and there will line up with each other, and they need them to be on just like that. Most likely the machine shop is going to help you out with that, but you can't always count on that, and I like to give them the best version of what I can give them possible. These connecting rods are a reusable item, however the piston is not, and it looks like this piston is pressed on here. Oh no, it has cram locks. You can see them right there. So this, it doesn't look like this piston is pressed in there, or the wrist pin is rather, so that's cool. Yeah, that's not too bad. So we're going to get new pistons to match whatever the bore is going to be after the machine shop. So again, make sure you've numbered them correctly, and exactly how you took them out is how they're going to go back in. So this is flipped over. Normally number 1 would be over here, but on this, we're going to make this number 1. So that way when we have it back flipped over, we can put number 1 where number 1 goes, and so on and so forth all the way through. Now, I like to just go in sequence, so number 2 we can put here, and 3 here, and 4 here, and so on and so forth, so you have an odd bank and an even bank. Some people like to take pistons out in the firing order. Some people like to go reverse order. Honestly, I just use the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way down. So that is what I'm going to work on, but before I do that, I'll show you how to rotate things over. So let's say for funsies that this one's already out and I want to do number 3 and 4. So what you do is you come to the front crank bolt, just like I showed earlier, and you can just rotate the engine over until they are at the peak position, which is right there, and then you can do that. So the cool thing is that all the pistons are exactly the same. So do the rest of the 7 exactly how I showed you. Make sure they're numbered and orientated correctly on whatever device you use to hold it. And I will leave a link down below in the description to the one I have over here on the left. So I have all my pistons out in my nice caddy here, and I'll show you what I took to doing. So this is 1, 3, 5, 7, and these are the even numbers down the left side. And I know that's backward to how it is on a Ford if you're looking at it straight up, but you gotta remember I have the engine upside down when I'm going to be installing pistons, so that's the way I'm going to do it. Feel free to do it any other way you like. Heck, these can be even out of order because of something I did. These could be out of order. It really doesn't matter because I can keep track of it with something I did. I grabbed my stamping set out and I actually just stamped the bottom of the connecting rod. So you can see the number 5 there and a little arrow pointing to which way it goes. And then you know that this rod is going with this cap because there's numbers on the side, kind of faint to see, but it physically won't fit with another rod because look, these are actually broken apart, so it's not like you can even put them on, but the orientation's always going to be correct because the lock goes to lock, and as long as you put this back in the number 5 hole facing the correct way, it can't ever be wrong. So I highly suggest stamping them. Number 7's really good. Look at that one. So you can very clearly see a 7 and then an arrow, so you know this goes in the 7th hole. Arrow. Before we take the crank out, we're going to have to take off this rear plate that has the one-piece rear main seal on it. And it looks like it's, I don't know, 6, 8 millimeter bolts. Doesn't look too bad. And hold on to these bolts as well as this rear plate. It's completely reusable. We can just pound this seal out and pound in a new one. Again, hold on to these because we're going to clean them up and reuse them. We just need to remember to put RTV on them. Make sure all of your bolts are removed, and then we can just grab a prying implement. Sometimes they're really stuck on there because the manufacturer uses RTV to make sure it doesn't leak. Because a rear main truck, or a real rear main seal plate would be a really big fix. Oh, I can hear the RTV giving up. You might even want to do this before you even put it on the engine stand. It might be a little easier for you that way. There we go. It has little dowels too. It might make it a little trickier. Oh wow, check that out. The rear main seal stayed on the crank. Oh, okay. Oh, that's fine. Okay, so all we have to do is pound in a new seal into this one and be ready to be reused. Okay, cool. So now it's time to take our main caps off. Now, the order I'm going to do that in is a reverse spiral. So I'm going to do number 1, 5, 2, 4, then 3. So you can kind of just do a reverse spiral in. Ford has labeled these. You can see the little arrows right here at the end of my fingertip. It's super tough to see on camera. Don't worry about it. And then if you clean away some of the goop and grime that's on here, you can kind of see a number 3 right there, but it's like super tough to see. I don't like that at all. I'm probably going to stamp in my own numbers. The orientation seems okay. You can see those arrows pointing that way because it's super important that you never mix these caps up. This one has to go here. This one has to go here. You can't like put this one here and that one there. No. You have to get them in order, and the orientation also has to be correct. So make sure that you are getting that correct when you're replacing these. So I'm just going to stamp each one with their correct number. I have number 1 right here. Number 1. Now it's very clearly readable. And if your arrows aren't very readable, I would reinforce those with some more stampage so you get this just right. We want to make sure that we know that this is going to be 1, 2, and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on number 1 here, grab an 11 millimeter socket and do the side bolt first. Loosen that one up. Come over here, loosen this one up. I'm just going a little bit each time. I'm not like undoing it fully or anything. Just a little bit here and there. There we go. Once you break them loose, usually you can just spin them off by hand like this. Ooh, that's a lot of dirt and grime. And then what I want you to do with these is throw them into the trash. They are torque to yield, which means you can't use them again. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to, put these with the machine shop because they're going to need to clamp them down. We're going to have to supply them with some new bolts that are not torque to yield. And then we can remove these dowels. So instead of having like an LS where there's a 6-bolt main, it is a 4-bolt main, and they use dowels as, I imagine, kind of a cost-cutting measure. These I would hold on to. I believe these are reusable. So yeah, just hold on to these guys. I've seen some people modify it so there's another mains bolt there, but we probably won't get into that. That's probably only really high-performance applications. And sometimes they're a little sticky. Some leverage will help. There we go. A little sticky on that one, but not too bad. And then we're going to take a 13mm socket and break loose the main cap here. So we're just going to break that loose evenly as we can. Little bits, little bit, little bit. So I've kind of changed positions and I have my long breaker bar. And what we're going to do is continue breaking them loose, but just do a little bit at a time. So just a little turn there, and then a little turn there, a little turn there, a little turn there, and then it's completely broken loose, so you can just move them with your fingers. Is take them out so they're nice and loose like this, but just leave them in, make sure they're not threaded at all. So what I'm going to do is grab a plastic hammer and just tap, bring the bolt out a little bit and just tap it back and forth. Now you're not beating on it, you're just giving it some light taps back and forth. You can probably take this one out. And just wiggle it back and forth like this. Whoop. Oops, there goes the bearing. So there's the bearing that came out of it. Actually looks like it's in pretty good shape, like I said. So we can go ahead and take this main off and put it on our work table, because this bit's done. So now just do the same thing for this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. You'll be able to remove your crankshaft. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that off camera. Might be a little boring for you. Watch me do the same thing 4 more times. The only thing that's different is on number 4 here, it has a little offset stand for the pickup tube. Let me just grab a 17mm wrench and loosen that guy off of there. And hold on to this, it's completely reusable. This doesn't go bad. We can just clean this up and we'll be made in the shade. So now you've gotten to this stage where your crankshaft is nice and exposed, and how we remove it is you want to pull it straight up. You don't want to like lift one side and then the other. You want to do both sides as evenly as you can, straight up and out. Just like that. And when you set it down on its backside, you know, where it actually attaches to the flex plate. That's how you want to sit one of these crankshafts down. You don't want to set it down on one of the weights. And then notice most of our bearings came out with our crankshaft. We can just reach in there and get those out. Looks like there's a thrust bearing right here and right here. And there you go. All our bearings, yep, no more bearings. So this is very nearly ready to go to the machine shop. So here's an assortment of things that I'm getting ready to go to the machine shop. Now, I've already shown taking the connecting rods and pistons out of our engine, and you could take those rods to the machine shop. They'll take the old pistons off, put the new ones on, and they're good to go. You can reuse that connecting rod, but Summit Racing sells this, and it's a wonderful high horsepower forge connecting rod for not a ton of money, and the link is down below in the description. Sponsored by Summit Racing. They sent these over, as well as everything else on this table. The thing you will need though is some new pistons. You can get new pistons pretty much anywhere. Most websites sell them. So you don't need super special pistons. We're just going with a cast piston with a nice flat top that is 30 thousandths over, or 0.75 of a millimeter. I know that's really close to 30 thousandths, but not quite. I thought I should mention it since it says 0.75 right on the piston. So you need the next size up piston, which is 0.75 or 30 thousandths of an inch. And I like to bring the piston to the machine shop, the same person that is going to be machining the engine bigger, because I want to be able to hand them the piston and say, hey, make the bore this big. I don't know what this is exactly down to the micron, but you have the reference point, because what if it's off a teeny bit? I don't want to take that chance, so it's always a good idea to give them this. And we want to give our pistons and our connecting rods, or your old ones, I like these new ones, and the piston rings, which again are 0.75 of a millimeter bigger than stock, over to the machine shop because they're going to hang the rods on to the pistons, and then they're going to be neutrally balanced. So all the pistons and rods are going to be the exact same weight as they're going around the engine, so everything is nice and balanced, and you have to do that. You can't get around that. Where they take that weight off is right here on the bottom of the connecting rod. When these get back, this most likely won't be round anymore. There'll be a little flat spot where that material got ground away. And we're not talking about that much weight, just a few grams here or there, but it really matters when an engine is spinning very quickly. So it's super important to get that right. The other thing I want to go over is wrist pin diameter. No, I don't know the wrist pin diameter off the top of my head, but what you can do is when you get your new pistons and your connecting rods, either your old ones or the new ones I'm going to link for you, you want to take the wrist pin, just see if it fits in there. Does it fit like this where it's really nice and good and it doesn't go tick, 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 tick? See how nice that is? If it doesn't fit like this, perfectly nice, then you have the wrong wrist pin and you need to do something about that. Either get different pistons or different connecting rod, whatever makes sense in your particular situation. But I thought I'd mention it right now because sometimes that happens. So 8 pistons over here, 8 connecting rods over here, 8 sets of rings here, and the reason you give the rings over as well is so they can do that balancing. I've had some machine shops where you don't really need to bring the rings. I've had other ones where you do, so just bring them. If they don't use them, no biggie. Get them back in the box, everything's good. The other thing I'm going to bring is these made by Melling. They are the freeze plugs. It has a bunch of different brass freeze plugs. I got the brass ones because they tend to last a bit longer. They're not steel, so they can't rust. Yeah, these are the ones I prefer, and the link is down below in the description. We are also having our cylinder heads rebuilt, and Summit was nice enough to send over 24 of these stock valve springs by Melling, and these are just the stock compression, the stock length, the stock height, stock everything, because it's going to be a stock rebuild, and we have 24 of them to go into our cylinder heads. Unfortunately, they don't sell the valves or the keepers or anything like that, but the machine shop said they'd source those for me. A lot of the time, you can just give your cylinder heads over and say, hey, rebuild these for me. You don't even have to bring these, but since I got these from Summit Racing, I thought I'd mention them. The link down below in the description, as always. So here are the cylinder heads I took off earlier, and they're in this nice plastic box that I just happen to have, and check it out. They're nice and fit very snugly in here. I have a cardboard sheet between the two machine surfaces. So what's going to happen when these heads get rebuilt? The part that interfaces with the engine is going to be made sure to be completely flat and smooth. The valves are going to be taken out and replaced and ground, so they make a nice seal that holds all the compression in, new keepers and new springs. And I believe they are going to check the concentricity of the cam towers as well and make sure that those are nice and concentric so the cam rides perfectly. So let's talk about our crankshaft next. Now, back in the olden days, you would always have to take your crankshaft in and you'd have to get it 10 ground under. I mean, that was like the norm. And then you just get bigger bearings by 10,000ths of an inch and everything was good to go. That was like old school big block Chevy cast crank sort of things. These are the new ones that are basically the new hotness, that are very, very hardened. They last an incredibly long time, and a lot of the time you can just clean them up and reuse them. Mine in this instance, I already had it checked by the machine shop. They gave me the thumbs up to just clean it up and reuse it. Heck, even the bearings when I pulled them off looked more or less brand new. So all the machine surfaces are still ready to go. There is no variance on there, there's no wear, there's no anything. But if you're unsure, you can always take your crank to the machine shop and say, hey, is this thing any good anymore? And they'll either say, yep, you're all good, run it, or, you know what, let's take 10 off of it just to be sure. And that's going to be bespoke to your situation, so make sure you double check that. So now's a really exciting moment. We're going to be loading our engine into our transport. So I've already put a chain on here from the front, or the back to the front, and the bolts are in with a decent amount of thread. It's not incredibly heavy like it was when it was fully dressed, but it weighs probably about 200 pounds, thereabouts. So, you know, you don't want to just put it in there with 2 threads and think it's okay. So I'm just going to take the tension off of it, just like that. And what I can do is grab my 17mm socket and start taking off the bolts for the apparatus. You could also just take the apparatus off of the stand. There's 2 ways to do it. I'm just going to do it this way. I think it's going to be the easiest for me. There we go. So then I can just pump our engine up until it'll get onto our tailgate. Taller than the stand, so we can just kind of roll the stand out of there and get him out of the way. So once we have our engine high enough, we can go ahead and you know, gingerly pushing in place. I'm using my Suburban here because, well, this is the engine out of my truck, so can't use the truck this time. And you just want to be gentle with it, make sure the boom doesn't hit the top of the roof, things like that. So once you get it in, so it's going to hit right there. I'm going to lower it down, just so it clears like that. And then just get it as far back as I can. Like that is awesome. And then when it's more or less where you want it, we're going to go ahead and put that down. Just like that. Looks great. Now the eagle-eyed among you might notice that I have a piece of wood down on my Suburban. That's not just to protect my Suburban, that's also to protect the block, because if you put that in the back of an engine, if you put the engine in the back of a truck and metal surfaces are grinding where your oil pan is going to go, well, that can cause a leak. You don't want that. So put down some wood or something like that, so that way it protects both your truck, SUV, whatever you're using, and the future mating surface of your oil pan. And once our engine's where we want it, we'll just disconnect our hook. I'm going to leave the chain in here because when I'm unloading at the machine shop, it'd be nice if it had something to hold on to. And I don't know what provisions they have. They'll either have like a forklift or a couple guys might be able to pick this up. I like using the crane because it saves your back. You only have one of those. So after it's disconnected, we can get our crane out of there. So I've ratchet strapped it down to the hold downs of my Suburban. Now that could look different for you, but it's important that it is in 4 different spots so it can't twist or move. And you really want to play out the scenario that you're in an emergency braking situation because it's a lot of weight and that could get loose and become dangerous. So make sure that's not going anywhere. Make sure you say the obligatory phrase and this thing is good to go. So the next thing I want to talk about is miscellaneous items, such as this. This is where the oil filter and the coolant bypass go. This goes up to the reservoir, this goes to the radiator. And you can see that it is pretty oily and grubby and just not what I want to put on a brand new engine. So this is the time to hand this over to the machine shop. It doesn't need any machine work, but you know what they do have there is a hot tank, and it'll just cook the you-know-what out of this with some chemical solvent, and all that grease will fall off. It'll come back looking pretty snazzy, and you can do that for any part you want. Timing cover, oil pan, stuff like that. Now is the time if you don't want to manually clean this. Usually, they will just throw that in for free as a courtesy for you, but I don't want to speak for everybody. So, before you go to the machine shop, watch this portion of the video. I'm actually wrong in my assumption of how things were going to go down at the machine shop. Maybe I kind of misunderstood what was going to go on. You do need to give them the main caps and the pins and the side bolts for the block. That's what these are. So I'm going to go drop these off real quick. Luckily, the machine shop's not super far away because the main caps are actually what hold it in the machine that bores the cylinders out. So these are actually necessary. I was wrong before, and you might ask, well, why didn't you just refilm it? The block's already at the machine shop. I'm just coming back to grab these, so I can't really reshoot it, so the best I can do is a correction. Also, if you're having your rotating assembly balanced, they are going to need the front damper, the flex plate, and the crankshaft. That's what this is here. Again, I was wrong about that. Just because they're not going to cut it 10 under doesn't mean they don't need it for balancing reasons. And so I'm going to have to drop that off. And I think they're going to hot tank and polish it for me too and make it look nice and snazzy. So that's pretty cool. Also, if you're getting your rotating assembly balanced, you don't need the main cap bearings, but you need to send at least 1 rod bearing. I'm just going to send the whole pack so I don't have just like a loose bearing flying around going wherever. These are made by King Racing. They are a tri-metal bearing. These are omega overkill. You do not need a bearing this expensive or this high performance. I just did it because I want this engine to last a super duper long time and I don't want to mess around with this again. And these are the stock size bearings. So if you're going 10 under that you need to compensate for that, here is my part number and the link is down below in the description if you want to use these. But again, you could totally get away with using a less expensive bearing. These are quite pricey, but they are quite high performance, so there's the trade-off. And these, of course, were sent over by our incredible sponsor, Summit Racing. So make sure you buy your speed parts at summitracing.com. So we are all loaded up for the machine shop. Everything the machine shop needs, and I went over earlier, is in the back of my Suburban here. Now, what are the words you say? Because it's a little intimidating going into a machine shop. It's their profession. You don't really know what's what's going on, I understand that. So I'm going to tell you exactly what to say. Bring them your block and everything I've shown here and say, hey, I need this block remachined. I want to rebuild it as a normal stock build if that's the way you're going. If there's any kind of weird variations, like if you were doing a stroker kit, you need to tell them that as well, but we're not doing that. Usually, if a block is in decent shape, what a common stage of how big they're going to make the board additionally is 30 thousandths of an inch. That's really the industry standard for the first rebuild of a block such as this one, and most likely yours as well. So ask them if it's possible to do a 30 thousandths bore, and I'm going to say 99 times out of 100 in this situation, they're going to say, yeah, no problem. So I would go ahead and get those pistons ordered so you can hand it to them and say, make it this big, like I said earlier. Then you're also going to ask them to balance your rotating assembly, which involves the pistons, rods, and the rings, which is what I showed earlier and why we're bringing them. They're also going to do what's called hot tanking this block, which involves putting it in a pressurized vessel with superheated chemical solvents that dissolve any oil on there. And that's necessary not only to make it look brand new, but to make sure you can machine it really well as well, and it gets any kind of weird adhesives or solvents or metal chips or anything out of there that they don't want during that machining process. And then it's going to be what's called mag checked or magnafluxed. A very basic way of understanding it is a charge it with a positive charge, the powder I believe is a negative charge, and then they pass an electrical current through there, and through the power and magic of electricity you can see if there's any big cracks or things to worry about on an iron product such as this block. And that's absolutely essential, because if it fails that, you want to know before you dump all this time and money into a block. So it's absolutely essential to get that mag checked. And then also we're going to ask them to put the freeze plugs in. You can probably do that yourself if you want to save a couple bucks, but I already have them here, take them, and they're just going to do that for me, and then I don't have to worry about that. And I know that they're installed correctly, because it'd be a real bear to have these ones leak on the back of the block that interfaces with the transmission. The transmission would have to come off, and boy, does that not sound like fun. And again, if you're not sure and you need to line hone where the crankshaft is, I would go ahead and bring your mains and ask them to at least check it, because they can just check it and they might tell you, hey, yeah, you know, it needs to be line honed, or they'll say, no, it wasn't really necessary and we can move on. That's also something you want to double check. And then also make sure that they're going to check the block deck where the head sits on top of the engine. That has to be perfectly flat, and they'll check that, and if it's not flat, they'll make it flat. So make sure they're going to do that as well. And then we brought our cylinder heads. They're not on the camera right now, but they are here, and those are going to be pressure tested because they're aluminum. They can't be mag checked, and they're going to be rebuilt like I described earlier. And make sure you use those sort of words and get a price up front. Get an estimation. Say something along the words of how much for everything out the door do you think? Because they're not going to give you an exact number, but they'll give you a ballpark, and it's always important to be on that same level expectation of payment. Because it'd be a real bummer to get an enormous bill at the end of this that you weren't expecting. It shouldn't be too bad, and I'll let you know exactly how much mine costed in Southern California. Now, I'm not going to film at the machine shop. A lot of people don't like being on camera, and I totally get that, but I showed you basically the exact interaction that you're going to have, and when we get back, I'll be going over the entire experience when we start rebuilding this thing, and I hope you're subscribed so you don't miss that. Now it's time for a really exciting moment to close the tailgate and get going to the machine shop. So that is how to take apart the bottom end of your Ford 5.4 liter 3-valve engine and get it ready for the machine shop and bring the heads and everything else I went over. It is really exciting to get to this point and send your engine off to the machine shop to be, bored over and everything. You're gonna get everything back. It's gonna be pristine and look brand new, and you're just gonna have to put it together like a big old Lego set, and it's gonna be a ton of fun. I'm super excited, looking forward to that. But I also want to let you know that there was a lead time for everything. They told me 2 to 3 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and guess a month. It's not terribly uncommon for a machine shop to take about a month to get your products back to you, machined and ready to go. Honestly, don't be in a huge rush when you're building your engine. When you're in a huge rush to do something like this, the propensity to make a mistake increases by a lot, and you want to avoid that. You want to go slow, take your time, be methodical and thoughtful with everything that you do, and trying to hound the machine shop to get your block done quickly is not the way to do it. Trust me on that. So there's probably going to be a gap between this video and the next one where we get the engine back and we get to put it together. So please try to bear with me on that. If you found this video helpful or interesting or exciting in any kind of way, please consider giving a like or even subscribing. It really helps my channel out. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Summit Racing, for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you next time.